Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome back. Sorry, we had a glitch in the transmission where the video wasn't flowing properly. So just to make it a better experience, we wanted to log in again and inshallah continue from where we left off. We were speaking about the test and trials that are sent our way. And it's important in order to be able to resist these tests and trials and temptations, we have to kind of know about their nature, right? So here in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 94, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the believers saying, "Oh, you believe, Allah will surely try you, yani test you with a game, yani animals, which will be within the range of your hands and lances, so that he might mark out those of you who fear him, even though he is beyond the reach of perception. A painful punishment awaits whosoever transgresses the bounds set by Allah after his firm warning." Okay, so this again, as we had stated, refers to those in a state of ihram, which is when you enter into your intention of making Hajj Umrah. And in that state, there are certain things that are prohibited, like wearing perfume, like having relations, like, is what is mentioned in this verse, not being able to hunt game, not being able to hunt animals for food or other reasons. So here Allah is saying that we're going to test you by making this game or these hunting animals come really within your reach, because this is actually referring to a particular incident in the seerah where the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba were actually in a state of ihram, and this was the Umrah they were trying to make, but it wound up not being an Umrah that they actually performed, but the Treaty of Hudaybiyah ensued instead of that Umrah, right? So they were not able to perform the Umrah, but they had started out with this intention and were in the state of Umrah. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is revealing to them that they're going to be tested and tried by making that which is prohibited come very close to them physically within their reach, so that Allah will see who is it that truly fears him, even though they cannot see him, right? So this is actually, we learn many things from this verse, right? The first thing that we learn is about the nature of prohibited things, the nature of prohibited items, right? They have this attraction, they have this allurement, especially when they become easily accessible to us, right? And then we said, even if in spite of that ease of attainment, the ease of, being able to easily attain that pleasure or that benefit, you still abstain. In that state, if you still abstain, this is how you build spiritual muscle, right? When you attain, or rather when you train your consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whom you cannot see, to rule your desire for what you can see and access. This is when Iman wins out, okay? When your consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is in the alim al-ghayb, he is beyond our ability or beyond our sense perception, even though you cannot see him, and that attraction, temptation, that sin you can see and is easily accessible to you, but you choose the ghaib over that which is visible, right? You choose Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala over that which your desire is in. In this case, in that state, Iman wins out. And subhanAllah, isn't it one of the traits of the muttaqeen that they believe in the unseen? يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, right? The one of the first traits, or the first trait of the believers, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens up Al-Baqarah, is يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, right? The muttaqeen are those who believe in the unseen, who believe in the ghaib. So this belief is really a yaqeen, it's a conviction, which produces incredibly transformed individuals who go from being those who just take whatever comes their way, whether it's game or animals or other haram items, versus those who have really become trained in having taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because of the iman that has entered their hearts, and they're able to stop themselves from just grabbing what is easily accessible. So realize the nature of tests. Let's understand and recognize the nature of tests and trials. They will be tempting, they will be attractive, many times will be easily accessible, and they will be things that fulfill our immediate desires, like hunger or carnal desires, or a desire for wealth, and all of those things that are related to human desire are usually the things that are satisfied by committing various sins. But resistance to, so if you commit any of those sins, you'll get the satisfaction, immediate satisfaction, right? Instant gratification, they call it, of your those respective desires. But resistance to these temptations, passing the test, will give you Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His nearness, right? So it's a matter of just thinking and choosing. Do I want that instant, immediate gratification, or do I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His nearness, right? So as I mentioned, this particular verse Ibn Kathir mentions was revealed in Umrah of Hudaybiyah, when the Muslims were in a state of ihram, and the animals and the birds and the game, the hunt, the animals that you normally hunt, or whichever ones there were, they were all around the Muslims, the Sahaba, as they were on their mounts going for Umrah in a state of ihram. They could have easily caught them. But this prohibition was in place, and had they done that, there would have been a painful punishment for them, as this verse highlights. A painful punishment awaits whosoever transgresses the bounds set by Allah after His firm warning. So once you receive the warning and then deliberately disobey, then this is something that becomes extremely serious and actually has a warning attached to it, right? A warning of punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, this reminded me of how someone else, another group of people we had talked about, were also tested in a very similar way. I hope you can recall that the Ashab al-Sabt were actually tested in this way, right? When the hitan, the fish, would only appear in great numbers on the day of the Sabbath and would not appear in that abundance on the other days when there was no Sabbath and they were allowed to freely hunt and fish, etc. Right? Not hunt, but fish, but and all work, yes, was allowed. So, and the other days, but not on the Sabbath, right? So, subhanAllah, look what happened to the Ashab al-Sabt, right? Because of their violation of Allah's commandments after it had clearly been given to them. Okay, so let's look at verse 95. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقتلوا الصيد وأنتم حرم ومن قتله منكم متعمدا فجزاء مثل ما قتل من النعم يحكم به ذوى عدل منكم هديا بالغ الكعبة أو كفارة طعام مساكين وعدل ذلك الصيام ليذوق وبال أمره عفى الله عما سلف ومن عاد فينتقم الله منه والله عزيز ذو انتقام, which means, O you who believe, do not kill game while you are in the state of pilgrim sanctity. Yani in ihram, right? وأنتم حرم, while you are in the state of ihram. Whoever of you kills it willfully, there shall be a recompense, the like of what he has killed in cattle, as shall be judged by 2 persons of equity among you, to be brought to the Kaaba as an offering, or feed the needy as an expiation, or its equivalent in fasting, in order that he may taste the grievousness of his deed. Allah has pardoned whatever has passed, but Allah will exact a penalty from him who repeats it. Allah is Almighty, He is fully capable of exacting retribution. Okay, so this verse is talking about the expiation for this sin if it is committed. Again, it starts off with the commandment, with the prohibition that, oh, you who believe, do not kill, do not hunt game in a state of ihram, and whoever does so from among you then has to do the following, and the expiation is then stated. So just to clarify this, I wanted to share Maududi rahimahullah ta'ala. He has some very insightful explanation on this point that I was just going to briefly share, that it is forbidden to hunt game or to help another hunt in any way whatsoever while one is in ihram or in the sacred precincts, in the haram boundaries. It is also haram for one in this state to eat of the game that has been specifically killed for him. If, however, someone else not in this state, for non-ihram, kills the game for himself and then gives a part of it to the pilgrim as a present, then there is no harm to accept it as a present. So you can accept game that was hunted, meat that was hunted as a present if the one doing the hunting was not in a state of ihram. But doing it yourself is prohibited. Helping another one is prohibited. So these are very, very specific guidelines in this field. And of course, harmful animals are an exception to this, right? If there is some harmful animal that would, result in getting someone hurt if bitten by that animal, then of course there is a clear text actually that Abdullah bin Amr radiallahu anh, reports from the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, which means خمس من الدواب من قتلهن وهو محرم فلا جناح عليه الأقرب والفأرة والكلب والقور والغراب والحداد, which means that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said it is not sinful of a person in the state of ihram to kill any of these 5 animals: the scorpion, the rat, the rabid dog, the crow, and the kite. So these animals, since they're so harmful, then of course it is not unlawful to kill them. Even in the state of ihram, you are allowed to kill them. But other than that, as a general rule, hunting is completely, killing any animals is completely prohibited, and whoever does so will have to do one of the following. The first thing that the verse mentions as expiation is that they will have to give a like offering as an expiation. So whatever they killed, they will have to offer as sacrifice that same animal or its like, right? So number one, you give its like as a sacrifice, that same animal or an animal like that. And how is this decided? It is decided by 2 fair individuals that are appointed, and they decide what a suitable recompense will be for that animal that was actually killed. And this is what the verse mentions, that 2 individuals of fairness who are recognized to be fair and they have good judgment and have the ability to carry out this task skillfully with competence. Those are the 2 individuals that will decide the exact kafara, right? What is to be sacrificed in place of the animal that was killed. Now, Shaykh Zuhaili rahimahullah ta'ala in his tafsir mentions that this sacrifice has to be done within the precincts of the haram, or this is what he presents as the explanation of what it means for the sacrifice to reach the Kaaba, right? Because this is what the verse is saying, هَدِيًا بَالِغَ الْكَعْبَةِ. If you look at the Arabic, هَدِيًا بَالِغَ الْكَعْبَةِ is translated as to be brought to the Kaaba as an offering. So he's saying what is meant by the sacrifice reaching the Kaaba, or what is meant by the sacrifice being brought to the Kaaba, is that it should actually be slaughtered within the precincts, within the premises of the Kaaba, and that its meat should be distributed to the masakin of the haram, to the poor and needy of the haram, of that space. And the word Kaaba, he says, is used here to indicate the haram premises in general, that is where this act should be carried out, the slaughter, the distribution of the meat. So, the individuals, masakin of the haram benefit. But he says the reason the Kaaba is mentioned while the haram is meant is because it is the most important. It is for the magnification of the Kaaba, right? It is for the ta'zeem, the glorification of the Kaaba, for giving the Kaaba the respect, the status that it has, that it is singled out. And of course, it is the most important single element of that within that space. So it's for its magnification and for its status, it's specifically singled out. But what is meant is the general haram vicinity. But if you're unable to do this, or you have a choice, in fact, right? So it's not that if you can't do this, then do number 2. It's in fact, you have a choice of doing any of the 3 types of expiation. The first of which we just mentioned, the actual sacrifice of an animal, of a like animal or the same animal. Number 2 is to expiate by feeding the masakin. Okay, and again, it is those two fair individuals that have been appointed for the case of this person who violated their ihram. These two individuals will then decide how many people are to be fed in recompense for the animal, depending on what type of animal was killed. So again, this is going to require two skilled people who know how this is done, who know what would be the appropriate number of people to feed according to what animal was killed, right? So perhaps the bigger the animal or the more meat an animal has, the more valuable an animal is. Perhaps those guidelines would increase the number of masakin, the number of poor people that would then have to be fed to count as an expiation. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. And the other choice that this violator of ihram has is to fast, right? And again, the two appointed individuals will also, in this case, determine how many fasts are a suitable number, a fair number to cover that violation. So this judgment actually, requires a lot of intervention, human intervention, in terms of, the judges coming in, not official judges, but any two fair individual with experience coming in to fairly decide and have the ability to make a reasonable recommendation, right? Depending again on what type of animal was killed. And actually, this happened in the time of Umar radiallahu anh. A man did kill game while in a state of ihram. So Umar radiallahu anh, when the person came to him, Umar radiallahu anh told him to go and appoint two people to decide his case. So the man appointed for himself Abdurrahman and Sa'ad radiallahu anhum. Now, it's interesting here, the reason for this expiation is given. Why do we have to perform this expiation? Why isn't it just enough to feel bad for what you did? Why is it that, this expiation has to be made? Well, it says it here, right here in the verse, لِيَذُوقَ وَبَالَ أَمْرِهِ, right? So that he may taste, so the person who violated their state of ihram, so that he may taste the seriousness of his deed. Sometimes it's not enough to know what you did was wrong. It's not enough to, just superficially feel that it was wrong, but it has to really be internalized. That realization really has to be deepened. And when does that happen? Well, here the verse is telling us that happens when you go out of your way to make up for that deed, right? It's not just, okay, I'm sorry, I feel bad, I did it, it happened, not that attitude, but no, to really go out of your way to make amends, to really go out of your way to make up for the damage by then bringing forth that much benefit, right? So the same amount that you damaged, you want to at least bring about the same amount of benefit or expiation or feeding or acts of worship, etc., right? So this is really, really a hugely important point in Islam, that we must feel the seriousness of our sins. These punitive consequences in Islam result in our purification, right? They are in place for us to not become insensitive to sin, right? This is the purpose, right? This is a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They sound like they are consequences, they are expiations, but why are they there? Not to make our lives harder, but actually to keep our hearts from becoming harder, right? It's from us to not become insensitive to sin, because once you become insensitive to sin, this is the beginning of the hardening of the heart. When we think it's not a big deal that I did something, who cares, doesn't matter, etc., etc. That type of thinking is the beginning of that black dot that eventually then covers and rusts the heart, so that the entire heart becomes covered with that black dot, which grows with each additional sin that is not followed up by repentance. What is going to happen to that heart? The blackness is going to cover it to the point that it becomes blind. and it is no longer able to perform its most important moral function. If the heart is blind, it is not able to perform its most important moral function, which is distinguishing the good from the bad. And its most critical, this is the, the heart really is supposed to be your moral compass, right? Just like your brain is there to guide you throughout life and direct you and keep you from danger and keep you from doing the wrong thing or falling into the wrong a hole and putting yourself at putting your life in danger. Our brain, our eyes, our other body parts, they all work together to preserve our life, right? So that we don't jump in front of a moving car, so that we don't put our hand into a burning stove. All of these organs have functions that work towards the preservation of life. And the heart, its primary function, not physiologically, but morally, its greatest function is to be able to distinguish the good from the bad. But continued sins that you don't feel bad about and keep doing take away this ability of the heart to tell right from wrong, which is why people continue to sin and not feel bad, instead begin to enjoy the sin continuously. And this also takes away the critical spiritual function. So there's a moral function and there's a spiritual function of the heart, right? The moral function is this ability to distinguish between good and bad. So that's your moral compass. That's what you rely on. And its critical spiritual function is to be a clean and empty vessel that has the room, the space, and the aptitude to become filled by the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We had spoken about this, how the heart is a limited vessel or organ when it comes to size. Just like if you fill a cup with water, there's no more space left in it for anything else because it's limited, right? And this is very much what the heart is like. If it has negative feelings, if it has anger, if it has jealousy, if it has arrogance, then it has that much less room for filling it with positive things, the most important of which is love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a connection with Him, love of all whom He loves, love for all the things that He loves, etc., etc. So our job is to try to keep our hearts as clean as we possibly can, at all times if possible, most of the times if possible, inshallah. The goal is to have a clean, pure heart that can become filled by love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is when the vision of the heart is the most clear. This is when it can provide the most clarity, the most direction, and become a reliable source for the individual of faith and iman. Now remember what happened to those who failed to observe the Sabbath. When they failed to observe the sacredness of the Sabbath, look what happened to them. Just like that, the ihram has a sacredness, right? Something is sacred, that means it cannot be violated. If something is sacred, that means its rules cannot be broken, right? When you enter into sacred spaces, there are certain rules, there are certain guidelines that you follow and observe out of respect for that sacredness in that space, right? So just like the Sabbath has a sacredness, which when violated resulted in the hardening of the hearts of that community, as well as a extremely difficult punishment that then descended upon them. This is what the Muslims are being warned against as well, right? That the state of ihram is a state of sacredness. It has requirements. If they are broken, you must be made to feel the consequences so that this hardening of the heart does not occur, that happen in other communities that we have been talking about and studying in this surah. To save ourselves from those similar consequences, we have, alhamdulillah, the options of expiation, right? So this is how we can understand why is it such a big deal? Why are the expiations in place? Why do these things have to be observed? Now, ultimately, the sanctity is designated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says what is sacred, when it is sacred, and when such and such cannot be done. He decided to make the haram. He decreed that the haram airspace be sacred, right? He decreed that the state of ihram be sacred. He decreed that Ramadan be what it is. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who can decide sacredness, who can decide where to put barakah, who can, this is all Allah's domain. Remember, the beginning of this surah, what does it say? The first verse of this very surah ends with the words, Inna Allah yahkumu ma yurid. Indeed, Allah legislates as He wills. It is Allah's domain. He decides what is a test for people, what place is special, what time is chosen. Our job is to observe the limits set by Him, to regard as sacred what is sacred, to regard as a violation what is considered a violation, to see as sin what He has decreed as sin. So morality in Islam is not relative. We do not believe in moral relativism, which refers to how morality is different for different people. What is good for me morally, it may be bad for someone else. No. In Islam, we do not have moral relativism. Morality is not relative. It is legislated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He decides as Lord of the universe, as the creator of all, what is good and what is bad. And our job is to accept His judgment, because He is Al-Alim, the all-knowing, and I am not. Because He is perfect and has perfect knowledge, and I do not. So it's His job to decree. It is my job to accept and obey. That's the gist of the Islamic attitude, right? Okay, so far we have just mentioned the case of the one who breaks the state of ihram deliberately. But what about the case of the one who hunts game, hunts animals, kills an animal on purpose? Not on purpose, but forgetfully, right? So here it is the sunnah that actually gives guidance in this area, because here we only spoke about, from the verse we only spoke about when a person does this. But if it is done forgetfully, then the sunnah tells us that you still have to pay the expiation, and this is in Ibn Kathir, even if you do it forgetfully. It's an important principle to learn right now at this moment, that the sunnah further expands on the Quran and illustrates how the Quran is to be applied. We can never ever fully understand the Quran or even apply it without knowing the sunnah, right? And the most powerful example for this is the salah, right? Yes, the Quran commands to salah, but nowhere does it give details about how to pray, when to pray, what times to pray, how many rakats to pray. None of that is in the Quran. So that is such a huge testimony, the fact that the Quran is silent on one of the things that is supremely mandatory, the salah itself, mentioned countless times, right? So many times in the Quran. That is indicative of the fact that Allah wants us to look to the Sunnah to implement what He has commanded in the Quran, right? And you have this hadith, for example, from Bukhari, that the Rasul said, وَصَلُّوا كَمَا رَأَيْتُمُونِي أُصَلِّي وَإِذَا حَضْرَتِ الصَّلَاةِ فَلْيُؤَذِّنْ لَكُمْ أَحَدُكُمْ ثُمَّ لَيُؤَمَّكُمْ أكبركم. So this is a narration which in the Sahih of Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, where the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, and pray as you have seen me praying, right? And if the time of the prayer comes, then let one of you call the adhan, and then let the oldest of them lead you in the prayer. So clearly, when He's saying, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, pray as you have seen me praying, this is coming from the sunnah, this great directive of the Quran to establish the prayer, to pray, cannot be implemented without the sunnah. So this is a very, very important point to understand here, that the Quran cannot be understood or implemented without the Sunnah. And whoever claims that we only follow the Quran, we do not follow the Sunnah, we only need the Quran, we don't need Hadith. Oh, it's in the, but it's, so what if it's in the Hadith, it's not in the Quran? This type of reasoning is completely rejected by the Quran itself, because the Quran itself is what commands to follow the Sunnah. So we can't, a lot of times we just say, oh, I don't have to do it, it's just Sunnah. the Quran is what has commanded us to follow the Sunnah. So going against that is actually going against the Quran itself, right? Without going into too many details about the different types of Sunnah. That is a topic for another time. So the difference between the one who does it on purpose versus the one who does it forgetfully, whoever hunts game on purpose versus forgetfully, is obviously the forgetful one is not to be blamed, right? While the one who does it deliberately is blameworthy, right? So one act is highly condemnable, then the other is overlookable, right? Because of the circumstances under which it was done. So whoever returns to disobedience after Allah has made it clear will be punished by him. Yani whoever, and this is what the verse is talking about, that Allah has pardoned whatever has passed. So if this happens once, if it happens, forgetfully, you make the expiation, inshallah, you are repentant, regretful, Allah, inshallah, will of course pardon us, right? Because expiations are actually, they absolve the person of the sin, and then there is no further punishment for that person. But Allah mentions, but Allah will exact a penalty from him who repeats it, okay? So generally, the one who repeats the violation, again, a repeated offender, is his case is different from the one who does it once and just gives the expiation. Giving the expiation, giving the kafara, or receiving the prescribed Islamic punishment removes the punishment of that sin in the akhirah. And this applies to all punitive measures in Islam. For any sin for which there is an Islamic punishment, once that punishment is implemented, then there is no longer that sin on that person. The person is considered purified from that sin, and he will not be punished for that particular sin in the akhirah. And this is why you have some individuals in the lifetime of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam come to him and admit to the major sins they had committed because they wanted to be purified in this life. They did not want to risk being punished in the hereafter. So they would just come at times and admit to the guilt of their sin. And if they had not told, perhaps no one would have found out. But they wanted the purification from that sin by receiving that punishment in this world, because they knew that meant they would not be punished for that sin in the hereafter. So better to get it over with here, better to get it taken care of here. But here, this ending part of the verse refers to the repeat offender, right? For the one who does the same thing again, who commits the violation and the ihram again. Then in the case of this person who is a repeated offender, even after the warning has come from Allah of its prohibition, then indeed Allah is almighty. He is able to exact revenge from whomever he wants. And the violation of the sinner does not harm Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any way. It is the aggressor himself that is bringing upon this punishment upon himself. This is one of the few verses where we see one of the firm attributes, the stern attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Where he says that Wallahu azizun intiqam, right? Here we see he is fully capable, Allah is almighty, fully capable of exacting retribution, fully capable of taking revenge on anyone. So this is a very, very, most of the time we in the Quran have the forgiveness, attributes of forgiveness, attributes of pardon, attributes of mercy, and those are the overwhelming majority. But this is something that we should not forget, and something we'll come back to, inshallah, shortly. Okay, we'll do one more verse, inshallah. One more verse for today. Okay, let's look at verse number 96. أحل لكم صيد البحر وطعامه متاعا لكم وللسيارة وحرم عليكم صيد البر ما دمتم حرما واتقوا الله الذي إليه تحشرون. The game of the water and eating thereof are permitted to you as a provision for those of you who are settled and for those on a journey. But to hunt on land while you are in the state of pilgrim sanctity is forbidden for you. Beware then of disobeying Allah, to whom all of you shall be mustered. Okay, so hunting seafood, alhamdulillah, is allowed in ihram. Okay, so we are allowed to take whatever we need. Obviously, no one hunts seafood; they just fish or gather seafood. That is allowed, and if someone is hunting, then that is also allowed. When it comes to seafood in a state of ihram, remember, many people in the past used to come on ships to perform the Hajj, right? So when their provisions ran out, sometimes the only thing available to them on a journey, on the pilgrimage, would be seafood, right? Would be where they were at in the middle of the sea, and they're able to benefit from that. And you can partake of the sea and its food, whether it is dead or alive. Sheikh Zuhaili mentions this. Normally, meta, or the dead animals, are prohibited to us if we don't slaughter them ourselves. If they are found dead, we're not obviously to eat them. That is one of the normally haram items. However, when it comes to seafood, even if when you attain it, when you get it, it's dead, it is still allowed to, you're still allowed to eat it, right? And this is actually from a hadith in Bukhari on the authority of Abu Huraira radiallahu anh, that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said about the sea, هو الطهور ماؤه الحل ميتته, which means that it, referring to the sea, it is tahur, its water is pure, yani you can make wudu from it, you can take ghusl if you need to. Al-hillu maytatu, yani, and it's dead, even if you get something while it's dead, it's still halal for you to consume. And fear Allah, the one to whom you will ultimately return and be accountable for your observance of His word, right? This is what the verse ends with, the reminder of the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fear Allah. Why does it make sense, complete sense to fear Allah? Because ilayhi tuhsharun, we're going back to Him. You're going to be gathered back onto Him. So if you're going to be gathered back onto Him, then why wouldn't you fear Him? Why wouldn't, if that is inevitable, and as a believer you have full conviction in that meeting, then why wouldn't you fear Him in what you do today, every day, and everything that you say and everything that you do? This consciousness should permeate our thoughts altogether. We could start the next verse, but it is quite involved, because of which I think it is better to, inshallah, leave it for tomorrow to get a, inshallah, better, fuller explanation. So I think we'll stop here for now. Inshallah, if there are any questions or comments, please feel free to leave those. And inshallah, we'll be back here tomorrow, Tuesday at 4 p.m. to continue with verse 97 from Surah Al-Ma'idah. Jazakallah khair for tuning in. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة